Run, Forrest! Chapter 13. Now, on the same kind of notion that we were presenting earlier with Hotline Miami, there is much more to say than merely the presentation of the sheer impact of all of these events and how they have taken many a life. We see here especially the real impact that such an event would have upon those especially of less grounded minds, we shall say. The absolute havoc of suddenly being displaced from all of the domains and dominances that our species has had for such a long time. And in that, there's much to be said for exactly how one can construct a narrative of this kind, where there is a positive ontologic snap, breaking realignment in one's perceptions. From the hard edge that our protagonist has been able to put forth as his position, to the broken mentality that our poor curate is putting forth here, in juxtaposition directly within the same scene. Could not care an inkling less. I know I've commented on it a few times, but the AI is surely something. And it fits ultimately with the janitor's bin. And it fits with the overall unreality of things now that we've had that come into the fold. Chapter 14. Being able to swap between the primary character and the secondary character of the brother. It gives us an intersectional perspective outside of just what one might be able to anticipate coming upon the situation completely anew versus someone who has been personally involved with everything, that of course being the primary protagonist here. There are many things to be said about the rummaging flourish one would have to make in the face of suddenly having their lives flipped upside down. Yes, sure, hearing a little bit of detail here and there, but not being witness to any amount of it in the first person. It'll allow one to sit within a state of disbelief. And here we are seeing the boiling of that disbelief suddenly, in such a fashion that it brings about an immediate conflagration upon the society which had been so readily routine heretofore. And in that, how we can anticipate such a society would find its footing, and so many would fail in the pursuit thereof. Get out of my face, asshole! Yo, man, this is my house. What are you talking about? And that's my fridge, too! Buddy boy. Are you just ruining all my goods? All my foods? Oh, like, come on now. Away with it, then. Well, nothing to be done then. Chapter 15. Too firmly a thrust upon the totality in which an entire peoples are laid low by tactics unanticipated. The entire abandonment of all polity in its regularity. Now being given over to the Martians' offense. Not something so unsubtle and unnuanced as fantastic stories of orcs or even the clatterings of Vikings in something a bit more historic, but rather the genuine analog being treated as little more than mere living obstacles to the ultimate objective of attaining the territory proper. Siege without walls, and encirclement without a circle, but merely a crescent in its stead, gives us a brilliant opportunity to consider in detail the stratagems that are employed by all forces depicted in any given piece of media, and whether or not there is something to be made out of them besides the regular conventionality. Now that's through the looking glass. The accomplishment of Chapter 16 is undoubtedly the capacity to convey confusion, disorder, and bedlam, disarray, in the form of the many minute details which conflict and contrast with one another, despite the fact that it flows in a single stream, is the consummation of grand capability to characterize and manipulate the whole of a scene, to control and careen from one side to another all of the little notions that culminate into the concept of such a state of affairs. Not only within the context of delivering a bit of narrative, but also in the way of giving us a proper peek into multitudinous terrors and dreads that constitute such a state of affairs. People put on the run from something that is entirely imminent. Peekaboo. Alright. Done and done. Yeah, as I say, a lot more simple than I'm used to. With the last level, at least. Oh, boy. That actually got me to jump. Chapter 17. What an escalation. A true catabolicus. Breaking up of everything. Falling to pieces only for those pieces to find their way back into holes once more. To strike back. Resurge against the evening tide that would ruin them rightly. And not only that, but the ultimate sacrifice of the Thunder Child in and of itself. The bringing to bear of not simply the flight and fight, scarce as it might be, of humanity in this moment, but also then the utilization, the repurposing of something in a crowd unto itself, of vessels here, there, and everywhere, to be the focal point of retort against the apparently indomitable enemy. That is showing some real tension, a tug of war between what seems to be the inevitability of defeat and the ingenuity and tenacity of humankind. But more promptly, more immediately, the way to apex resistance. Is that a Molotov? No, that's just a straight up can then. Oh man, that bit right there, that reminds me immediately of Mud and Blood. Brilliant little game. Fantastic real-time strategy of its day. Chapter 1 of Book 2 comes at us from the perspective of the poor main protagonist and the curate. Pivoting from the perspective of him in his earlier period, being the initial observer of all of the details of everything, then to the brother, which got everything that was developing in the more countryside areas, and then finally back to someone who was stuck within the actual fold of things. We get an entire circumspection of not only someone who is familiarized with it as one might be, to one that has just started upon the recognitions, to finally one that is, well, caught alongside the psyches of the individuals to hand, one who is more strong and one who is more flaccid. And in addition, details of the manifestation of the fighting machines as they are presented, the continuation of foreshadowings made apparent and impactful as they are, as the fifth cylinder finally meets the face of Earth, and trickling downs that are proceeded therefrom. I give up. You win. Is that so? In that case, must I kill you? Or can I just walk off? Nope. Absolutely must perish. Alright. Smokin'! And so finally in chapter 2 of book 2, we have the entirety of the Martians in their nature coming to the fore. H.G. Wells' choice of using a philosopher for the presentation of all of these fine details does seem rather coincidental and to the benefit of the thing. The substance of these things, from their clothing to their biology, material culture, all culminated into a single chapter after all of the anthropocentric destruction puts into the picture from the very beginning of their descent to the machines themselves as they spill out from their pits into the vast landscape of England. We see what makes the Martians in this story. This, in and of itself, is something that I find exceptionally important for anybody who wishes to appropriately characterize, let alone put together any kind of comprehensive, living, breathing, emotioned world for any setting of fiction, especially any additional races which are not human, which are inhuman. So I see we've had some renovations in the corner. Chapter 3, I believe, really encapsulates the desperation of everything, the abandon of all hope against hope, and the weight, the encapsulation of what one might have experienced whether they were free and afar, or they were held hostage, as this poor couple in the downfallen building. And in that we see the voracious tenacity of those who are under the iron tendril of the Martians. Even in the midst of such ruinous conditions, yet still they hold fast, and they hold fast against all odds, against even the abandonment and hopelessness of their peers, to that which extends beyond merely the moment of disaster. Now starting up outside. Well, I guess that's a sad end to her story. I always knew it would end like this. Killed by a man in a fucking rat mask. Chapter 4 holds in its reserves intimate madness, virulence, viciousness that is so well exemplified by those who have been pushed to the edge, who have been pushed to the absolute rim of what they are able to sustain. One man, soft and incapable of continence, the other man, hard and plying himself as thoroughly as he is able to hold himself together. The two of them coming together, the ultimate synthesis of anthropic conflict, and then the consequences whenever the conflict is no longer observed and kept in check by the prevailing eyes of those powers that be, so human in their own way. Whenever humanity's bellicose nature is no longer able to hold itself under its own scrutiny, under its own purview, whenever it is held in check instead by the watchful eyes of an intelligence other than ourselves. This is Chapter 4. I really admire that they managed to render that as a proper elevated television strapped to the wall, rather than just being a solid piece that's completely collidable. So simply put, Chapter 5 is the victory of patience, sustainment, steeliness, holding out against the tide, holding out against the hopeless, against the imminent, against the overwhelming. To hold oneself, even in spite of what one must do in order to attain it, the heart of one's rigor, to finally allow it to bud and flow forth into the wonder, the incredible brilliance of survival. So there's a very clear identification between the regularity of the clothes, something that I didn't necessarily think had so much investment into it as I mentioned it earlier, with the realization of the bin being here, but some real identification between the clothes and the sense of normality that Jacket apparently has, and it gives a lot of weight to why we call him Jacket as the protagonist, well, as the main character anyway. No phone calls, surprising. Though this does mean that at least our gray and haggard old self, moving rather stodgily as he did, does seem to be the real Jacket, at least as we understand him. Yet our car is the same. That says something then, doesn't it? Chapter 6 shows the positive desolation that one faces in the brandishing circumambience of destruction in mass. The total eradication of so much of the regulars of our lives, of us humans going on about it, even in these earlier years than we exist now here in 2024, naturally. The complexities that had been built upon and built upon and built upon, and that so many had come to be intimately familiar with, to the point of being entirely reliant upon it, being entirely bred within it, being entirely mandated about it. How swiftly and immediately we come back to our roots, our bases of being, our animal selves, combined with the rationale that we implement in such spates and spatters, and how easy it is to pick oneself up if you have the wit for it, and move forward to a new dawning, albeit terrifying. Have at. Knock yourself out then. Chapter 7 genuinely brings about the comparison between not one who is famished of spirit, but one who is famished of effort, where the curate versus our protagonist here was simply one witless, lost in his exaltations of spirits high. The artilleryman stands as something of a testament as to those who so proclaim in grandiloquence to lay claim to the entirety of the world, and yet are at no whim of their own to make good on such a claim, especially as the insight of the event itself is upon them. And while I do believe the artilleryman has many true claims against his fellow man, yet still he exhibits all of its weariness, disease, bluster, cheering on of himself, his apparent status as man over man. Yet still he stands there upon the precipice and elects comfort and fullness rather than the labors he would charge so many others with. A war pig after all. Okay boys, the bastard will be here any second now. It's time for us to show him what we're made of. Remember your training and play it safe. Follow protocol and we'll all make it out alive. Bet. Chapter 8 was the syzygy of everything, the zenith of it all, the height, the fulfillment of our great earth upon invaders strange and foreign, upon minds without bodies, upon heads with hands, upon those who would wreak devastation to their self-preservation, as we ourselves have so many, even upon our own kind. And yet in the totality of it, we find a great and terrible pride to be had, a radiance, a near hubristic birthright indeed, that humanity has earned in its mere survival, its sheer continuity. There's so many species before us, the gravest risk of extermination, and yet they carry on despite the overwhelming odds, carry on despite the certainty of failure and death in equal turn, and of the humble things. The Chekhov's bacteria, if you'll allow it, that means everything in a story, as much as it does life, a universal truth for all. But it did at least get us our last duder. Oh, the poor fishes! Well, at least there was due recompense served. Chapter 9, much as that before it, shows the other side of the coin, of such successes, such surmountings, such surpassings of infinite trials and tribulations. The demented man indeed, after surviving something so perilous, vast, disgorging, of all that one has ever known in their entire being, even those that have more opportunity, more metal within them, more grit, even those who have exercise of the highest facilities of reasoning, as a philosopher of the first rate might. What havoc can be wrought, what dread may settle within the soul of one who has survived. Stay down, buddy. No, both of you down. All of you down! No! No! I promise. Chapter 10. I'll roll the review of it into the review of the whole book, because it's all very much one and the same. The War of the Worlds is nothing short of a perfect exemplar of world building. Not only that, but of grand conflict. We have in its minutiae the biology, the material culture, the mode, bare psychological profile, and each of these stages lain forth from intersecting perspectives to bring together an animate, soulful, mourning, praising, and flagellating review, not only of humankind, but any which might be under the boot heel of one which they know not whether they will be able to survive, let alone surpass. If one can't appreciate the richness, not only of the illustrative language, of the brilliant grotesquerie, the grimness, the violence, the viscerality, all of the interiority of everything, ranging from a third-person perspective, as described by a given character, to multiple first-person perspectives, and even something of a second-person perspective washed here and there as the story proceeds, well, I think, quite simply, you must not get story.